Welcome to our brand new That's Why podcast, where we try and understand what's going on in the news using social science and humanities to uncover the deeper phenomena that underpin our chaotic world. It's a big endeavor, it sounds ambitious, but wait until you meet our new guest today. We're very excited to welcome Moshe, the founder of Mo News, a fantastic journalist who went through CBS, Bloomberg, and Fox News before going on to create a digital news outlet with a simple promise, apparently simple, just the facts, non-partisan news. Is that even possible? Is this necessary right now? We're gonna get into that in a second. Welcome, Moshe. And thank you so much for being with us.
Nat, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we're gonna crack on with this, but first, I really would love to understand where this idea of Mo News is coming from. What was the moment in your background where you're like, yeah, we need to create a just the facts, nonpartisan news outlet?
Well, really, it came out of COVID. You mentioned I worked at a number of networks before and was figuring out what I wanted to do next. And that's when the pandemic hit and found friends and family who were seeking basic information about what was happening. And the news was overwhelming and confusing and changing what it was saying often on a daily basis based on what the politicians were saying. So I had a lot of, friends and family who were texting me and messaging me like, hey, what's going on? So I took to Instagram to basically explain what was going on to just like my close friends. And, soon enough, thousands of people, then tens of thousands of people start following. And what I thought was just an exercise to, help my loved ones turned out to be something larger. And a few months into it, realized that by taking news headlines, watching press conferences, doing analysis, doing interviews, that I was filling a need out there from people who felt that they couldn't trust the mainstream media, they couldn't trust the legacy media, and they were looking for a trusted person who they could trust for the news. And so that's effectively how Mo News started, sort of by accident. And so over time, it's only reinforced to me just the amount of distrust people have for some of the legacy media, and the fact that over time we have come to rely on people on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram for advice when it comes to lifestyle, when it comes to health, and in this case, when it comes to news.
And you think that's basically the format that builds that sense of trust between you and the audience, the fact that you're not part of an organization, you're just you in front of a camera giving news? Or it's the way you treat it, or is it a bit of both?
It's all of the above. I think part of it is that people have come to rely on individuals versus brands, right? I think that's part of it. I think,
and that's a good thing.
That,
sorry to interrupt, but you think it's a positive development?
I think it has both positives and negatives. I mean, I think one of the things that we should keep in mind is that, like, I'm doing this with, nearly 2 decades of journalism experience. There's accounts that have much larger followings than I do, with people who present themselves as independent journalists who don't have any background in the profession, and in some cases are trying to push an agenda. So that's where it's concerning, right? So really, it depends. In the same way, it depends on what legacy media outlet you're getting your coverage from. If you're only depending on one place and they have a very specific take, then that's probably not doing you quite a service either. Now, I will say one of the reasons people have come to trust individuals is that, again, you see that as a larger trend line in society. But I think part of what we're also doing, and one of the reasons that we've built up an audience, and others who are doing this are building up audiences, is they're, following some of the rules of the road when it comes to being a creator. One, transparency with the audience. What don't I know? What do I know? That I'm real with you, right? I'm not trying to present myself as the knower of everything, wearing a suit and tie behind a desk, overly formal. There's a conversational nature to it that I think is important. And I think a part of it also is an interactive quality to it. That I think people are frustrated with getting their news from a place that doesn't listen to them or doesn't listen to the stories they want to, or questions that they have. And so, especially since we got our foundation here on Instagram, I'm getting messages. I'm reading everyone's messages. And so when I wake up in the morning or anytime during the day and I see a bunch of messages related to one subject or another subject, I'm like, oh, that's you guys are interested in that? Let's ask those questions. Let's go on the journey together and discover why that story is.
But there's something interesting you said, like you have the same problems trusting a legacy news outlet because they can be biased as you would an influencer on social media. But
Sure.
isn't it a bit naive to an extent? Because fundamentally, you're not any influencer. You're a trained journalist. You're not, I feel you're kind of like selling yourself down by embracing that very interesting trend of individuals being trusted. But
Yeah.
the reason why we trust you, or at least the reason why I would trust you more than potentially legacy news outlets and certainly more than a random guy on social media, is because you have credentials of legacy news outlets. And
Sure.
I'm wondering how this plays out in the way you contrast both. As a journalist myself,
Yeah, I mean, listen. At the end of the day, that's in my biography. Like, I make sure everybody knows. Like, these are the places I worked. I bring my reporting skills. I bring my background in the profession to what I do here, and I do hope. I was describing the larger climate we face right now, which is like everyone's getting information from everywhere, and to your question, that's both good and bad depending on where you get your information from. I think one thing that we try to do, and what makes us unique in this space, is that we do bring skills from traditional journalism to this new media space, right? We are vetting out sources. We're not just reposting anything that we see out there that's viral, right? I think that is part of the problem with new media, getting your information from new media, which is like, hey guys, did you see this? Hey guys, I mean, there's so many accounts out there, right, that are just like, hey, this is crazy. Well, is it? Have you verified it? Who presented it? Is it out of context? Is it a 7-second clip that maybe if you watch 30 seconds of it or a minute of it, it would present something different? I mean, you certainly see that playing out in coverage of a lot of issues, whether it's politics, whether it's the war in Gaza, whether it's Ukraine and Russia. You know, give me 30 seconds previous to whatever you're watching or 30 seconds afterwards, and it might be a completely different story. And so I think that's super important, and presenting that context is something that we do. Letting folks in behind the scenes, you know, given my background in journalism, something we try to do at Mo News is also explain why the media covered it that way. And, you know, sometimes it could be for a reason, and sometimes it's just pure incompetence, as I like to tell people.
Awesome. So basically, when Elon Musk is saying legacy journalism is dead, you're saying no, you're still applying the same methods, but in a different format. And what you're doing fundamentally is changing the relationship with the audience and making it more transparent.
Yeah, and I think Elon Musk has an incentive to say legacy media is dead, right? He owns X. But like, with all due respect to Elon Musk, the majority of stories being discussed on X, where are they coming from? Legacy media. So I think that like we should acknowledge that while there is this rise of new media and independent journalism, a lot of the content, a lot of the analysis, a lot of that the new media is depending on depends on the legacy media. And there is a relationship there that I don't think is acknowledged enough. You know, legacy media, you know, resents new media, and new media pretends that they don't need legacy media. And
but they do.
Neither is
right. Like
they totally do. They totally do. If you're a random person on X or YouTube, you don't have global resources like the BBC or the New York Times or whatever. Like, you can critique them all you want, but at the end of the day, like, keep in mind, like, you're not on the ground where the terrorist attack happened in Kashmir. You're not on the ground, whatever, in China. You're not in the White House briefing room. Guess who is there? For the most part, legacy media. And so, you know, I think that we should acknowledge that as part of this conversation.
Yeah, because they have the resources, the money, the training, the access.
Correct.
The behind it, and
it's not going to be completely replaced by new media.
Absolutely.
I mean, the world we're going into is some sort of hybrid of the two. You know.
Yeah, and I guess if it were, it would be catastrophic because the only material, as you said, that would be covered by these new journalists, independent journalists on social media, would be entirely mediated by what the algorithm shows them, as opposed to what people on the ground and news agencies, whatever you think about what that about their ethics does. It's at least a counterpower to the algorithms. I'm going to ask a much broader question. As I said, your tagline is just the facts, nonpartisan news.
Yeah.
Is this possible? Are you misleading people? Are you being naive? Are you?
We're trying our best, Nat. Listen, I tell people all the time, like, I'm not perfect. I'm human. Like, if we miss stuff, let us know. And I think part of what we try to do is also acknowledge if I miss something or miss some context. And so I want to keep that relationship with the media, I want to keep that relationship with the audience. I think that one reason why the media has lost trust is they aren't willing to be held to account by their audience anymore, right? Like, either they ignore it or they don't acknowledge it till, even coverage of things like, the fact that the media for so many years called the Wuhan lab a conspiracy theory. When, like, now you look at it and you're like, okay. And the people who were, talking about that were called conspiracy theorists. And the media, like, hasn't had, like, come to what they call a come to Jesus moment, which is, like, acknowledging that, like, hey, like, maybe we should have approached that differently. And so I think that's super important. As to your question, I try to check myself on a daily basis. There's a reason I don't use the word unbiased, because we all have biases. That's inherent. Nonpartisan, sure. I'm going to try to approach everything fairly and say, okay, here in the U.S., like, why is Trump doing something? Why the Democrats say it sucks? Do the Democrats have a point? Does Trump have a point? Here it is. You decide what you think about it.
So you're making that fascinating distinction between nonpartisan and unbiased, and you said we're doing our best.
Yeah.
So I guess nonpartisan refers to the fact that you're not affiliated with a party, and you don't have, at least consciously, an agenda that you're.
Correct. I'm a referee and not on one of the teams.
Absolutely, and you still have biases, as you said, but you're trying your best to kind of put them aside. That reminds me of Max Weber, the sociologist, with his concept of axiological neutrality. So that he's the founder of sociology and all social sciences, one of the founders, and he was like, okay, we know objectivity is probably out of reach. Being unbiased, as you said, is out of reach, but we're going to endeavor through through methods to try and be as fair, as unbiased as possible. So it's just an effort on one's part. But there's this other school after Weber, that said, that they're called the post-positivists. And they were like, is this even possible? Isn't this more misleading? Objectivity being not attainable? Should we just stop pretending and trying and just say, okay, here's where I stand, where I speak from, as communists used to say, where do you speak from, comrade? Here is my positionality and my biases and where I come from, and I'm just gonna go for it. And my honesty is just gonna be about owning it and being forward about it. It's not what you're doing, right? You're not kind of doing a like reflexive thing and owning your own biases.
Listen, I think if you follow the account long enough, there are stories where I'll be like, this is what's happening here, right? Like, I try to cut through the noise. If people perceive bias in there, sure. I think that there are times where one side might be wrong about something, and that's okay. Like, not every story has two equal sides with equally fair positions. Like, if somebody is like looking up at the sky and the sky is blue that day and they say the sky is black, they are wrong. Like, that is false information. And so I think that shouldn't be lost on anybody. But then some people are so, obsessed with their own side. They're like, well, you're not giving a fair shot to it. I'm like, well, what they're saying is verifiably false. That's gonna, we're gonna call them out on that. Like, that's just the way it is. Otherwise, the audience isn't going to come to trust me if I just decide every day they say this, they say this. Like, not all stories are the same, right? Some things are like, well, 99% of scientists claim X. Sure, is there a guy who claims the other? Yeah, but like, guess what? The Earth revolves around the sun. Like the Earth is not flat, right? Like if you say the Earth is flat, like we're not going to give your position equal bearing to the Earth is round. And so, I think that's important to keep in mind there. But I mean, you bring up an important philosophical question. I think at the end of the day, the issue people have for the most part is that people claiming to be objective are not, and in some cases pushing an agenda, and they're not doing enough to check their biases. And so we're making an overt effort here at Mo News to try to present, and like no one's going to be perfect, but we're trying to get damn near close to it. And so I think that is, that's our goal here, and we take it very seriously, and that's where we're trying to distinguish ourselves from the legacy media. Are we going to get it right every day? No. Are we going to miss things? Sure. But at the end of the day, like I am willing to engage the audience on that. I'm willing to acknowledge where we may have had faults on that. And I think that in and of itself is one of the parts of new media that people like, which again is the transparency, is the conversation, and is the fact that in a world where we're now all incentivized to go one direction or the other, and especially in American media, like you will do much better, and you know this on social media, you'll do much better, you will grow a much bigger audience if you pick a team. And we've realized that. Like I would have 10 times the audience if I picked.
Well, you have already I didn't mention it. You already beautifully have over 500,000 followers.
Right, but I think I would have 4 million if I was like hardcore on one side or another.
Yeah,
right? Because,
absolutely. Yeah.
The algorithm benefits controversy.
Yeah.
It benefits sensationalism, and it benefits like the audience. So many people want to live inside their own what they call content bubbles, where I am told every day that I am right and the other side is bad, and that is a much more comfortable place to live than coming to my feed every day and seeing something like, oh yeah, the other team sucks. Oh no, wait, what? We didn't do anything wrong. And the fact that I force you to confront the issues that your own opinion or your own worldview might have. There are some people that are totally game for that. And some people are like, no, I am much more comfortable being in a place where like, I am told that I am right all the time.
Yeah, that's the catastrophic impact of algorithmic filter bubbles that you're describing, yes. Where we all, given news is now a product on social media, and a product is sold if you like it, we are sold the news that we are supposedly liking. And that's catastrophic.
Yeah, because it keeps you on the platform. Because Mark Zuckerberg will keep you there for as long as humanly possible.
Absolutely.
And they're going to feed you stuff that upsets you and makes you comment, but mainly is stuff that, reinforces your worldview and makes you, gives you that endorphin, that dopamine rush.
Confirmation bias. Actually, we just launched that new format called One Story, Two Headlines, where we compare on one specific story what MSNBC says and what Fox News says. And the algorithm doesn't like it. So guys, if you're watching this, please interact with it, because they really don't like it. They kind of censor it.
It's one of those things where people say they want something, and then you see that that's not actually what they want.
Absolutely, 100%. I want to circle back to something fascinating you just said about, first of all, you said, don't trust people who say they are objective. Basically, trust honest journalists, which is a much more humble and tenable position. And second, you said, objectivity or being nonpartisan is not being bipartisan. It's not what Aristotle calls the fallacy of the just middle, where you take position A, position B, 1 minute for the Jews, 1 minute for Hitler, kind of, or not making comparison, but 1 minute for conspiracy theorists on the climate and 1 minute for 99% of scientists, and you make a kind of weird mix, and that is objectivity. It's not what this is, and I think it's very important for people to understand that. There is this, journalists we have to tell people now, you and I, Mo, journalists have a hidden job, right? We talk a lot about the way we cover the news, but what we do is also select what is the news. Right? A little detour in media studies tells us journalists do three things: agenda setting, priming, and framing. Agenda setting is what is the news. Priming is in what order, what's more important than what. Is Myanmar crisis less or more important than an Illinois hate crime? And framing, which is the perspective, the way we help the audience understand what's going on. And probably the most hidden part of that is the agenda setting and priming. So how do you decide What is news and what isn't?
We have a few factors that go into it. One is, generally speaking, our news judgment, as journalists, like, okay, what are the big stories today and the impact they're going to have? And by impact, I mean, how many people, how significant, right? If the president's announcing tariffs here in America, they're going to have an impact on not just the U.S. economy, but a global economy. That is a super important story that requires context. That's going to impact, billions of people around the world. As an example, right? So there's some stuff that naturally, clearly we need to cover that is hugely impactful. And so that's category one. Impact on individuals, impact on our audience, relevancy to their lives. There's also, a factor of is this new? I mean, literally the word new is in news. And I think that's why some people complain, hey, why did this story stop getting coverage? I was like, well, it's been a week. It's been a few days. We've moved on to other things. Has something fresh happened with it that feels big enough for people? The collective society, not to say they moved on, but they got their fill of it. And now it's until some major development happens in it, other things have sort of overwhelmed. So what's new? What's fresh today? Is one aspect of what we think about. When we also consider another factor, which is it able to be explained in a relatively straightforward way? Is it super complex? And unfortunately, there is a bias against stories that are super complicated to explain, that are super in the weeds, require a lot of extra context. Now, again, we try to, in social media especially, and on what we do is if the media, it finds it complicated, I was like, you know what? This actually is a good format to explain a complicated subject. But if something is super, super nuanced and complicated, more in the media tend to, even if it's important, ignore it for lack of expertise, lack of time, etc. One simple reason, is it interesting? If I bring it up to you, is that something that I think the audience would find interesting? Maybe it's not super important, but it's interesting. It involves people it involves a place and so, I don't know, if some major development happened at Disney World, that not necessarily negative, but everybody knows Disney World. We have a lot of people, half of our audience has been there, half of our audience might go there with their kids. And so some development there, it's there's a relevancy and it's interesting, right? Another aspect, and I think this is unique to social media, is what is our audience telling us they want to hear about? What are the questions that they're asking? And that's something we didn't do in traditional media, but that's as we think about what news we're covering. Guys, we got 25 notes today about this law that they're trying to pass in Tennessee or in Washington. I know nothing about it. I hadn't heard about it, but it seems to be getting buzz online. People are talking about it, and it might be because a TikTok went viral on it, a conspiracy theory has circulated on it, or it might have real impact. And someone, drew alert and it got shared a lot on social media. And so I think we try to be, there, which is this is a story we weren't thinking about, but so many of you brought it up. Here's our breakdown of it. We've called some people on it, even if most of the media isn't covering it. So I think there's a number of factors, from importance to interesting to what our audience is asking about. And then, there's some sort of general rule of thumb, which is, why didn't you cover that? I was like, well, because we expected that to happen. What's more interesting when it comes to news? Surprising things. You learn in journalism school that a dog biting a man isn't news, but a man biting a dog is news, because that doesn't happen often.
They're
right?
eating the dogs. They're eating the cats.
Yeah, that's why they're eating the cats and eating the dogs. For a variety of reasons, that became news, right? But the point is, if something happens every day, that's this, it's even on certain stories, right? Why do certain things not get covered? And I'm it's sad but true that in Chicago there are gang shootings every weekend, right? It's gonna be less coverage because we sort of expect there will be gang shootings in Chicago every weekend. Now, if there's a massive number, or it's different, or it happens in a community that we weren't expecting, then it becomes news again. And that's the same thing, when it comes to the war in Ukraine and Russia, or when it comes to Gaza. It's why is it not getting coverage anymore? It's well, because it's the war, is a year and a half old in Gaza, right? Is 3 years old in Ukraine and Russia. And so just did we sort of expect something terrible to happen there. And so when locals are why isn't this not getting coverage? I was well, because, sadly, it's the expectation on the part of the audience is, well, that doesn't seem like news to me. That seemed like that I expected that to happen. And so the novel nature of things, or when things go a direction you didn't expect, that's what makes them news again. And I know it's super frustrating to people. who are either impacted by it or people who work in those issues. But that's why, especially if you work in PR, communications, or even brand, to break through, you have to answer my question as a journalist, which is, why do I care? And why is this different?
That's fascinating, actually. And frankly, I never spelled it out that way. One of the things we reproach to journalists is to not cover things that are important and impactful. And you're saying, well, it's there's the element of novelties is super important. It might be important, might be impactful. It's not new, so it's not news.
Yeah, sadly, drought in certain parts of Africa. There are things that we know, and we're like, it's sad and it's super important, and it should get coverage, but we can see it with the way people click on stories.
Yeah,
I mean, people will tell you, and I know this. I worked at CBS for years. I looked at the data, on a raw level of like, oh, you guys should cover X, Y, and Z more. Okay, really? Because we will. And then I will watch the ratings on TV that night.
And they don't like it.
And I would get minute by minute ratings or on our website. And I will get all the clicks on each story. And I will tell you what you clicked on, what America clicked on, what the world clicked on, or what the world changed the remote control and changed the channel on a certain story. And there were certain trend lines where ultimately I was like, you might say you want that story, but the evidence shows right now that you don't.
For instance, give us the craziest kind of story there.
A very general thing. Online is different. I think Gen Z is slightly different, but I'll tell you this, that certain foreign stories, like here in America, the American audience switches out when foreign news comes on. But they'll tell me in survey data that, oh, I really want more global news. I want more international news coverage. Well, do you? Because on the news broadcast, you click down out of it oftentimes. And it's there's the evidence. That's what the evidence is. And not to say that stopped us from covering things. I made a point that if it's super important, we'll put it in the broadcast. But we might not lead the show with it. I might not spend 10 minutes on it. I might spend 30 seconds on it because it's relevant and you should know about it. But I'm not going to linger on it because as an audience, regardless of what you tell me in the surveys, when you actually are presented it in your homes, you might switch to the channel.
Yeah. So that's fascinating. You're saying basically that news is both an exercise in truth and knowledge and a service. And there's always this kind of balance to strike because you want to get paid, right? You want audience, and therefore you want.
It's a business. It's a business.
It's
for the most part, unless you're like the BBC or CBC And even then, at the end of the day, what is the point of covering what we're covering if no one is watching it?
Yeah.
Right?
But
you're going to spend resources.
Sorry? There could be a vicious cycle there where people are not interested in a topic, therefore we don't cover it or don't cover it as much. And when we cover it, we find that people are not interested in it because they don't know about it. It's very hard to break out of this cycle and put something on the agenda.
Yeah.
And
by the way, you see it here in America. Why do certain stories get more coverage? There's 5 shark attacks in the world every year, but you hear about them because people like to watch those stories. Totally out of context. If you ask people how many shark attacks there are, they would not be able to give you, they'd give you a number that is much higher than that. Terrorist attacks. There are thankfully globally very few of them. In America, almost none of them. But when they do happen, they get way more coverage than, say, car accidents, which kill way more Americans every year, right? Or airline issues. Anytime there's an issue on a plane anywhere in the world, even though there are millions of flights around the world, and is the safest way to travel, more than trains, more than cars, more than any other thing, planes. And so I think that is one of the notorious examples of taking things out of context, because as a ratings thing, planes air scare here in America, people watch that story, right?
So you're saying it's a business?
Yes.
And it's also storytelling.
Storytelling, and it's us telling you about your world. Yeah. So you're informed. You're informed about the weather. You're informed about your government. You know who you have context when you vote. You have context on laws that they're working on and problems and challenges facing either your community or other communities or other countries around the world. And so finding that balance, and you'll see that certain media outlets are much more focused on getting clicks and viewers and the business and ads. And some are more focused on a public service element. But that's why, there's an argument for government funded media, because they're less prone to have to just use this more sensational news to attract you, because they're not dependent on advertising. They can charge more for advertising if they have more viewers. They have more viewers if they give you a shark attack, right? And so that's the calculation. And so you have to try to balance it out between the interesting that'll get people in and the important that'll serve. And that's a constant balance, and everybody strikes it a different way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And actually, paradoxically, there was this point made by sociologist Bourdieu, even at the end of the 90s, I believe, on television, where he noticed that there was more diversity in news coverage when there were less news channels, a lower number of news channels, and a higher penetration of public broadcasting companies in it, mostly state-sponsored news. It's counterintuitive, that was more diverse than market-driven journalism, which tends to equalize and kind of normalize stuff based on what the market wants, shark attacks. Which is also...
Well, we're also all looking at social media. So it's like, what's trending number one on X? What's trending number one on Instagram? What's
That's
trending
it.
number
And
one on TikTok?
that doesn't
so
create diversity.
That.
Yeah, that actually creates homogeneity. There's this thing that, I don't know if you saw what Al Gore said the other day, basically comparing...
Al Gore, the vice president from the 90s?
Absolutely, 2 days ago, he didn't compare Trump to Hitler, but he did say that there were common mechanisms. And he quoted Theodore Adorno saying that when describing the Nazis, he described how the Nazis attacked the very heart of the distinction between true and false. The Trump administration is insisting on trying to create their own preferred version of reality. That's him, no longer Adorno. What's your reaction to
that? First, I didn't realize Al Gore was still out there, so Al Gore was still making speeches. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Al Gore ran for president after he was Clinton's VP, and actually got the majority of voters here in America, but we have a unique system. A state-based system, and Bush beat him by about 500 votes in Florida. So Al Gore he's been very much an activist when it comes to climate and environment. As to the argument that he's making, I don't think it's unique to the Nazis. I think any authoritarian regime is creating its own reality, right? And you see that, today, like if you get on social media in China and you search Tiananmen Square, you don't learn about what happened in June of '89. At least on Chinese social media without a VPN, right? Every authoritarian regimes globally have some shut off the internet, some cut off what you can search for. The more egregious examples are like North Korea, but whether you're in the Irans or the Chinas or the Russias, but there's a whole bunch of countries. I mean, I've been in various countries in Africa where I had to get on VPN to search some basic things on social media, because they all have variations of filters that they apply so they can maintain their own reality. And again, one of the sort of ironic things about social media is that it actually when it's open and free, you can learn about anything in the world, but it actually makes it easier for governments at times to clamp down on information on some of these platforms. And these technologies can be used for bad in addition for good. As for Trump and what they're trying to do. I mean, they're pushing their agenda. They're trying to create their own reality in the administration. They're trying to create, their own spin on the facts. And so I think any White House is selective in what they choose to push their agenda. I think Trump's White House in particular is very aggressive. They understand the tools of communication. He's been very specific and precise in the cabinet he's even chosen. The various secretaries of the various departments, a lot of them were chosen, they came from television. They're communicators. And so I think they've been very strategic there. I'm always reluctant to, everyone likes to go to the Hitler and Nazi comparisons, and it just feels to me that like the Nazis were the Nazis. Like they, like pure evil in what they brought about the worst catastrophe in modern global history, right?
To be fair to Al Gore, he did acknowledge that I did a journalist trick where I took something not out of context, but there was a
I
big...
mean, like I frankly, I'd love to hear his whole speech so I can really give you my
Absolutely,
whole take on
yeah.
it. But I do think that, like, my point is that I think authoritarian regimes do that. I think democratic regimes do that. I think the Trump team has been very aggressive in how they select facts. I think any Nazi comparison you should be wary of. But yeah, I mean, like, there's the famous example from the first Trump term about Kellyanne Conway, who said that, like, we're presenting alternative facts, right?
She came up with that, yeah.
And it's the sort of infamous quote there. And I think that there is an adage, whether it's in among branding or among politicians, if you repeat something enough, you'll get people to believe it. And if you question truth enough, then people don't know what to believe. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And that benefits you if you create such distrust in institutions that benefits the people that are trying to break down those institutions and don't want to be held accountable by those institutions, whether the courts or the media, sort of the kind of foundations of democracy. And so, I think there's a legitimate conversation to have about, the importance there and the attempted agenda setting. And when you feel that agenda setting and you're pushing an agenda crosses the line.
Yeah. So what you're saying is it's not just about censorship and manipulations, etc. It's about confusion. Distrust.
But yeah, when I don't trust the courts anymore, and I don't trust the media anymore, and I don't trust the FBI, the CIA, the CDC, the Pentagon, I don't trust anything in. Well, then who do I trust? Trust your leader, right? And what they have to say. And I think there's again, authoritarian regimes are like this, and I think there's democracies that are like this, and there's the transitioning democracies. Turkey isn't today what it was 20 years ago. Viktor Orban's Hungary is not today what it was 20 years ago. I think you're seeing it in Israel with Netanyahu. I think you're seeing it in America with Donald Trump. You're seeing it in a variety of places. And again, you can see it from the far left in Venezuela. You can see it from the far right in certain countries as well. And it all depends on the institutions that exist to check those powers. And the state of independent and free media. And I will say that here in America, we're very fortunate. There's one profession that is not a governmental profession that is written into our Constitution here in America. It is journalism, right? If you're familiar with the U.S. Constitution, the First Amendment is freedom of the press. We're the only profession that's written into the Constitution. And that is super, super important. And we have First Amendment rights here in a way that you don't have them in most Western democracies in terms of the media rights. And I still feel that we have a very robust situation. I know there's concerns about that, but I will say, I feel today that the media still, if you look at the coverage of the media today, there is a very significant portion of it that is critical of things happening in the Trump White House and is very different from what we see in some other countries.
Yeah, so let's not overreact. That's like vigilance, but not overreaction.
Vigilance is important, but not like, oh my God, the world is ending.
Yeah. I want to quote Hannah Arendt just to close that topic, because that's interesting and goes in the direction of both what you're saying and Al Gore are referring to. It's the ideal subject of totalitarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the dedicated communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. So that speaks to your argument of sowing confusion and distrust in institutions. And
by the way, all politicians lie, right? But some lie more than others.
Yeah.
Does Donald Trump lie? Absolutely. Like,
it's
Joe Biden lie? Sure, sometimes. Did Trump lie more than Biden? Sometimes, yeah, it looks like it. But I think that, like, we should acknowledge this is where, like, we should acknowledge the truth here about what's going on, and also acknowledge where, like, there are differences, right, in what's happening.
Absolutely, and it's not just a difference of degree, right? Or do you think it's just like they lie more?
There's frequency and degree, right?
Frequency and degree. But that points to a project or not? That is this like systemic in some ways? Is it organized? Is it like the same way they have this flood the zone strategy, the shock and awe strategy, do you think it's engineered in a deliberate attempt to create confusion, sow distrust, and blur the line between true and false? Or they just happen to be, like other politicians, just a little worse?
Our current president of the United States is a marketing guy, real estate developer. Like, what? Hey, do you know anyone in real estate? Right? You're selling a project, you're selling a building. Hey, let me. Yeah. You should invest in this property. Like, let's build this. It's gonna be the best. Like, it's gonna be the best. It's gonna be he's very talented at that, right? And so I think that you apply that skill set on a national level. He has agenda items he wants to accomplish. He has a way of doing it. And so ultimately, he is a master communicator in the United States of America. If you look at our most recent presidents, typically the person who wins is somebody who is a good communicator. John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. There are people, then George W. Bush we had because he could communicate with like a regular person, right? The reason why your aforementioned Al Gore lost, too elite. Not a good communicator than average person, right? That was the perception about him, even as close as that election was. It's one of the reasons Bush was reelected too. And so, I think Trump, he was a better communicator than Kamala Harris, certainly. He was a better communicator than Hillary Clinton, certainly. And that is why he was able, both those times, to beat those, one of the reasons he was able to beat both of those candidates each time. And so part of his communication style is repeating the thing, never apologizing for anything, ever. And if anything goes wrong, blaming somebody else. That's his strategy. That's the strategy he came up. That's the strategy that he applied to business. And that's the strategy he applies to politics.
You did mention concerns about freedom of press. How pressing are they? How overreacting are we? Do you feel any in your day-to-day life?
I don't. I feel like I can. I feel like I can say whatever I want. The only potential, issue is, one thing that's always consistent for journalists is access, right? Like if I say I cover certain things, will I lose access to certain individuals?
For instance,
ultimately, look at certain coverage. You often have this trend line, especially in the beginning of administrations, where you'll see these positive profiles of various government officials. Well, what are the reporters and publications doing there? They're trying to get in good with that person, so when they have news to present or something happens, they have access to them, right? What they call the term access journalism. That's something that you often see when somebody just comes into office or they're a candidate or whatever.
It's not just Trump. It's classic.
It's everybody. Everybody. It's one of the reasons why the media wasn't effectively critical of Joe Biden for 4 years, when it has now become very evident that they were hiding him from the media because he wasn't capable of taking questions, in the last couple of years, and still insisted on running for re-election at 82 years old. So I will say that, are we vigilant about what's going on? Sure. Do we see a White House that is much more aggressive in their approach? Literally the White House Instagram account the day before we recorded this had a video with a laugh track of the media chasing after the president with the fake news running after the president. That is a very confrontational, aggressive stance that we have never seen a White House in 250 years of American history take with the media. Okay? Is that a reason to be concerned? Sure. Vigilant? Sure. At the same time, Donald Trump has taken more questions in his first 100 days in office than Joe Biden took in 2 years. So he's available. He's taking questions multiple times a day. He exhausts us. You go in the Oval Office for what would have been a 1-minute event for Joe Biden, and Trump's taking questions for 45 minutes. Never ending. That Zelensky fight in the Oval Office came 44 minutes into what was typically a 2-minute thing in previous White Houses, right? And so because he finally got a question, and Zelensky upset him, and then the whole confrontation happened. And that's part of the fact that the cameras are in there, right? There's this crazy amount of transparency. And so that's the interesting thing that you can be concerned, but also we've never had a White House that's been as open and transparent as this. So I'm willing to be totally open about this, which is, are they confrontational? Yes. Super aggressive? Yes. Are they having a court fight with the Associated Press over access, and the Associated Press service, not using the term Gulf of America. Trump renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and the AP, won't use that term. They would take it into court. It's a whole fight. But who was the first modern president in a number of decades to prosecute the media, several reporters through the Justice Department? Barack Obama. So, I will say this, as I've covered multiple presidents. Obama was really hard to cover. Biden was really hard to cover because they just weren't available. It was hard to get information. It was hard to get access to them. Trump, literally yesterday, yesterday, the media was chasing after him because he started to answer questions outside one of the doors of the White House, just randomly to journalists. That's something we haven't seen from presidents in a very long time. I'm trying to think of a president that was like that. So, at the same time, sure, is the president and the White House taking an aggressive approach on the media? Yes. Is he going to use the FCC to try to chill anti or critical coverage? You're seeing that with lawsuits against CBS and ABC, and yes, absolutely. At the same time, he's super available. So it's a very interesting environment we're in here. And so, I think, like always, we should be vigilant about this stuff. I think that's why every media organization has lawyers or law firms that they work with to ensure that if they feel their rights are being infringed on, that they, sue if necessary. Then you see the government suing. So it is super confrontational, but super accessible at the same time.
That may be also one of the reasons, side comment, that you need some legacy news outlet that are able to defend themselves legally and have the budgets for that when this happens.
That's a big deal. Yeah. That's also a thing. It's like the New York Times has money and lawyers. CNN has money and lawyers. NBC has money and lawyers. Those of us who have a podcast or something, that is certainly a concern some individuals might have, where it is very hard for them to defend, even if it's a defamation suit that'll go nowhere. It's still going to cost you a lot of money on lawyers to defend yourself.
Yeah, I was listening to David Pacman, fellow YouTube journalist, opening up at those concerns. What's the craziest story you ever covered?
It depends on how you define crazy. I will say that I had the opportunity to. I was one of the first teams sent in to cover the nuclear meltdown in Fukushima in Japan.
What?
So the earthquake happened in Sendai in March of 2011. It cracked the runway at Narita in Tokyo. I was overseeing international news coverage for Bloomberg Television. And then they eventually allow planes in, I think, the next day. So I was on the same flight like Anderson Cooper and a bunch of journalists flying from New York to Tokyo for, at the time, we thought we were going to cover the aftermath of the tsunami and the earthquake, which was, significant up in Sendai in northern Japan. By the time we land, it's a long flight from the U.S. to Japan, we're starting to get these reports that there's an issue at the nuclear power plant in Fukushima, which is, relatively near Tokyo, one of the largest one of the largest cities in the world as far as population is concerned. So we were going to go up to Sendai. It's like, wait a second. We're also Bloomberg Television. And so we cover sort of the more business impact of things. And so, just with the earthquake, there was going to be huge supply chain issues for Toyota and some major Japanese companies, as well as just things that are made in Japan that are distributed globally. And so we get to Tokyo, and the nuclear story starts to develop a lot. And so we go up near Fukushima, and the Japanese government is like, you can't get within a certain number of kilometers of the nuclear plant, but you can get this close. And at the same time, the American embassy was like, yeah, I wouldn't trust the Japanese on this. You should stay further away from the plant. So we ended up just, for the most part, staying in Tokyo, covering what the Japanese were saying. If you've ever seen, there's a great multi-part series on Chernobyl that aired here in the States on HBO Max, and I don't know where it is globally. And it gives you a sense. Now, there's very much differences between how the Soviet Union approached Chernobyl in the 80s and how the Japanese government, but in the same way, there's a sort of don't worry, everything's going to be okay. You can be this close. Okay. And you're only getting the very sort of optimistic take from the government.
Were initially. You scared?
A little bit, sure. We eventually moved down to Osaka, further away, because at the time, the Japanese government said, listen, if you're in Tokyo and you have small children or elderly, you should probably leave Tokyo. But if you're a healthy adult, you can stay here. Said, you know what? I'm a healthy adult, but I am going to go down to Osaka as well. Because again, this is a huge nuclear power plant. We didn't know how it was going to end. Like the next reactor, I forget the specifics of the headlines, but they started to go in a way where like doesn't seem to be going in a great direction. And so to me, that was one of the more unpredictable stories that I covered, where like, you both had to worry about doing the news, getting the coverage right, but you were also worried about your own personal safety.
Wow, but yeah, you went through it and you don't look too affected, at least not visibly mutant.
I don't know. I think I like to breathe in the chest x-ray, the version of a chest x-ray every day. Well, you get that every time you take a major international flight, you basically get a chest x-ray.
Fair enough.
That's the radiation level you get if you take like a transatlantic flight or a trans-Pacific flight. You can see online, you can see like what radiation level you get, and it's like the same as like getting an x-ray.
Wow, so you got 3 on that trip to
I got a few x-rays on.
Yeah, you got a few, but thank God you were still alive long enough to participate in this podcast. Thank you so much.
That was my goal in life, Nat. My goal was to make it to this podcast.
Absolutely. I mean, like everyone,
Yeah.
But thank you so much for making it thus far. And now I think you can pass in peace. Thank you again.
Wow, that's a very dark way to end the podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the doom. We wanted to actually call the podcast Doom, but we're like, no, that's probably not gonna land well. On a serious note, thank you so much. It was really fascinating. Please, guys, follow Mo News. It's top-notch journalism.
You can find us mo.news, and you can find us Mo News on Instagram, and go from there.
Absolutely, and follow That's Why as well. Mo News is the fact, That's Why is the analysis. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks, Yomoj.